Before we begin, do something quick for me. Hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below telling me where you are and what time it is wherever you are watching this. I want to know if someone is reading this at 2 in the morning with every light in the house off. And if you have not subscribed to Creepyverse yet, do it now, because the stories we bring you here are not the kind you find anywhere else. These are real accounts, real people, real roads, real darkness. Tonight we have 9 stories. 9 accounts from people who climbed into their cars for what should have been an ordinary road trip, a drive to see family, a bachelor party weekend, a retirement adventure, a spring break escape. Ordinary people with ordinary plans. And then something happened. Something on a dark highway, something at a lonely rest stop, something in the middle of nowhere that changed everything. You have heard the warnings before. Do not pick up strangers. Do not stop for someone flagging you down at night. Do not trust a road that runs through the dark without any other headlights in your mirror. You have heard those warnings and you probably thought, like most people do, that they apply to someone else. That the bad things happen to people in movies. That you would know. That you would feel it coming. These 9 people thought the same thing. By the time they realized they were wrong, the road behind them had already closed. Let us begin. Story 1. The Last Thanksgiving. We left Denver on a Wednesday afternoon in November, a couple of hours past noon, with the windows fogged from the cold and a thermos of black coffee wedged between the center console and the gear shift. My wife Nora was in the passenger seat, wearing my old college sweatshirt, the one that had gone soft from too many washes and had a small ink stain above the left cuff that she always covered with her thumb when she noticed it. She had her hair up in one of those loose buns that looked effortless on her, but took approximately 6 attempts to get right, and she was holding her printed directions even though the GPS was already running, because that was just who she was. Nora did not trust anything she could not hold in her hands. We had been married 6 years by then, and the Thanksgiving drive down to Albuquerque had become our tradition. Her sister lived there with her husband and 2 kids, and every year in November, we made the same trip, took the same route, stopped at the same gas station outside of Raton, where the woman behind the counter always called Nora sweetheart, and slipped an extra packet of peanut butter crackers into the bag without charging for it. It was one of those small rituals that accumulates meaning over time without you noticing, the kind you only understand you loved after it is gone. I had just finished my shift at the warehouse when Nora pulled up to the gate, headlights cutting through the early dusk. I threw my bag in the back and slid into the driver's seat, and she immediately handed me a foil-wrapped sandwich she had made while waiting. Turkey and Swiss, because she always remembered without asking. She kissed me on the cheek and told me we would arrive at her sister's place by sunrise if we kept a good pace, and then she opened her notebook and started making small check marks next to items on a handwritten list I had not even known she was keeping. For the first few hours, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. The highway hummed under the tires. The true crime podcast she had queued up played through the speakers at a volume low enough to be background noise rather than distraction, and the landscape darkened around us as we moved south, the flat plains giving way to hills that absorbed the last of the evening light like a sponge. Nora fell asleep somewhere around 10, her head tilted against the passenger window with my jacket folded under her cheek, her breathing slow, and even in that way that meant she was actually out and not just drifting. I kept the radio on low, a local country station that faded in and out whenever the terrain swallowed the signal. The temperature outside had dropped into the low 30s, and I could feel a faint ribbon of cold sneaking through the weather stripping around my door, the kind of cold that whispers rather than bites. The Subaru had belonged to my father before he passed and had close to 200,000 miles on it, but it ran steady, and I trusted it the way you trust something that has never let you down, which is to say, completely and without question. We crossed into New Mexico around 9, and the highway began to feel different, less traveled. The kind of road where the darkness is not just the absence of light, but an actual presence, a thing that presses against the glass and settles into the cabin. Out here, the only proof that the world still existed was the white line along the edge of the road, and the occasional distant glow of a ranch house set so far back from the highway it looked like a dying star. It was around 11:30, somewhere on the long, empty corridor of I-25 between Raton and Las Vegas, New Mexico, when I noticed the headlights. They came up fast in the rear view, growing from 2 faint dots to a full bright presence in the span of maybe 30 seconds. A dark pickup truck, a Dodge Ram from what I could see, mud-splattered and moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing these roads. The truck pulled up alongside me, and the driver started honking. Not a polite beep, but a sustained, insistent series of blasts that immediately dragged Nora halfway out of sleep. The driver was gesturing. His window was down, and his arm was out, pointing toward the rear of our car, making a slashing motion with his hand that I eventually interpreted as something about our tire. Nora stirred beside me, blinking and confused, asking what was happening in that soft voice she had when she first woke up, the one that always made her sound like she was 10 years old. I told her someone was flagging us down, said it looked like we might have a flat. The truck driver pulled ahead of us and slowed, his hazards blinking on, pulling over to the wide gravel shoulder about 50 yards up the road. I hesitated. I want to be honest about that because it matters. There was something in my gut that registered before my brain caught up, some low animal instinct that said keep driving, and I almost listened to it. Almost. But the rational part of my mind ran the calculation quickly. If we genuinely had a flat and kept driving on it, we would destroy the rim and end up stranded in a far worse position. So I pulled off behind him. The man stepped out of the truck and walked toward us, and I watched him approach in my headlights. He was tall, easily 6'3" or 4, wearing a denim jacket with the collar turned up against the cold, and a baseball cap pulled low enough that I could not see his eyes until he was close. His hands were large, the knuckles thickened, the kind of hands built by years of manual labor. He moved with an easy, unhurried stride, and when he got close enough for me to read his face, he was smiling. The kind of smile that puts lines at the corners of the eyes, the kind that looks like it has been worn in over years of use. I told Nora to stay in the car with the doors locked and got out to meet him. He met me halfway between our vehicles and told me he had been driving behind us for a couple miles and noticed sparks coming off our back left tire. He said it calmly, like someone reporting mild weather, and I thanked him and walked around to the rear of the car to take a look. Crouched down with my phone flashlight sweeping across the tire, I could see nothing wrong. The tire was fully inflated, no visible damage, no loose hubcap, no debris caught in the wheel well, no physical explanation for what he claimed to have seen. I straightened up and turned to tell him it looked okay. And that was when I noticed he had moved. He was standing 3 feet from me, maybe less. He had covered the distance between us while my back was turned, and I had not heard a single step, not a single shift of gravel, not a breath. The smile was completely gone. What had replaced it was an expression I have spent years trying to describe accurately and still cannot get right. It was blank in a way that faces simply are not. Not neutral, not calm, not unreadable. Blank. Like the machinery behind the face had been switched off, and what was left was just the surface. I asked him which tire he thought had been sparking. He tilted his head to the left, slowly, like a dog processing a sound it does not recognize. He did not answer. The next few seconds exist in my memory as fragments rather than a continuous sequence, as if whatever fear chemicals flooded my system at that moment also dissolved the mortar between the images. I remember turning toward the car. I remember seeing Nora's face through the windshield, her eyes wide and fully awake, and watching something over my shoulder that her brain was already categorizing as wrong. I remember the hand on my shoulder before I heard the footstep, fingers like a vice, digging in with a pressure that felt designed to hold not just a person, but the panic inside them. I spun around and saw the blade, about 6 inches of it, catching the diffuse glow of our headlights, held in a lateral grip that told me with horrible clarity exactly what kind of swing he intended to make. He swung. I stumbled backward over my own feet and hit the gravel, and the blade passed through the air where my throat had been a half-second before. I hit the ground hard enough that the impact knocked the wind from me completely, and I lay there for one disorienting second, unable to breathe, unable to make a sound, watching his boots step over me as if I were a piece of luggage he needed to get around. He was walking toward the car, toward Nora. I heard her scream from inside. I got up. I do not know how. I screamed at her to get out the other side, to run, to get into the dark and keep running, and she heard me because I could see her scrambling across the center console. But she had forgotten to unbuckle her seat belt, and the belt caught her, and she was fighting it, fingers clumsy with panic, foam skidding off the seat, and he reached the driver's door and slammed his fist into the window so hard the glass buckled inward without shattering. I ran at him from behind. I did not think. I tackled him around the waist, both of us going down onto the pavement, and the knife skittered away beneath the car on impact. He was stronger than me by a significant margin, and within seconds had us reversed, his knee on my chest, his full weight pinning me to the ground. His hands found my throat with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly where to put them. The world went grey at the edges. Sound became distant, muffled, like hearing someone talk through a door. My vision tunneled inward, and the last thing I saw clearly was the passenger door of our car swinging open and Nora's white sneakers hitting the asphalt. Then the weight lifted. His footsteps pounded away in the direction she had gone. I lay there in the gravel gasping, every breath like pulling air through broken glass, my vision swimming back slowly in widening circles. I forced myself upright using the side of the car for support and stood there on unsteady legs trying to understand what I was looking at. The highway stretched out in both directions, silent, empty. The darkness beyond our headlights was absolute, a wall with no seam in it. I could not see Nora. I could not see him, just the road and the wind moving across it. I walked in the direction she had run, calling her name, my voice gaining strength with each attempt, but receiving nothing back. About 200 yards from the car, I found her shoe, a white sneaker lying on its side in the middle of the road like a discarded thought. I picked it up and kept walking. I found her 50 yards further, just off the shoulder where the gravel gave way to dead brush and frozen dirt. She was on her back, completely still, eyes open, staring at the sky with an expression that the dark could not soften. I will not describe the wound. I will not describe the sweatshirt. I will tell you that I dropped to my knees beside her and took her hand, and it was still warm. And I held onto that warmth for as long as it lasted, which was not long. And I told her help was coming, even though I had no way of knowing that. And I told her everything would be okay, even though I already knew that it would not. I knelt there in the freezing dark for a duration of time that I genuinely cannot account for. I have no way to measure it from the inside. I became aware of headlights eventually, a semi-truck that slowed when it passed our abandoned car, then pulled over when the driver saw me in the brush. His name was Hank, and he was in his 60s, and he wrapped his own jacket around my shoulders without asking and called 911 while I sat there unable to stop shaking. The police arrived, then more police, then a detective named Sergeant Philip Reeves who sat across from me at the back of an ambulance and listened to everything I told him with a stillness that I found, at the time, almost unbearable. They photographed the bruises on my neck. They photographed the gravel burns on my palms. They covered Nora with a sheet that glowed white against the dark ground, and I sat there wrapped in a thermal blanket watching them work and waiting, irrationally, to wake up. The investigation moved faster than I expected, though that whole period of time blurs in my memory into a single grey fog of police stations and phone calls and funeral arrangements. The truck was found 2 days later at a rest stop near Santa Fe. Wiped clean, mostly, but not entirely. Forensic technicians pulled DNA from a cigarette butt in the ashtray and a partial fingerprint from the rearview mirror. Both matched a man named Boyd Driscoll, 44 years old. A record of assault charges across 3 states and an active warrant out of Texas for a nearly identical attack on a couple near Amarillo 2 years earlier. That couple had survived because another driver happened to stop before Driscoll could finish. The FBI connected him to at least 2 additional highway attacks across the Southwest, a pattern targeting travelers on isolated stretches of road in the small dark hours. They found him 17 days after Nora died, hiding in a trailer park outside Flagstaff under a fake name, working cash jobs at a nearby ranch. He did not resist arrest. According to the agents who brought him in, he smiled when they read him his rights. Like someone who had gotten tired of a game he had been playing for too long and was almost relieved to stop. The trial was in Albuquerque the following spring. I was there every day, all 3 weeks of it. Nora's sister sat beside me with her hand gripping mine tight enough to leave marks, and together we listened to prosecutors build the case piece by piece, the DNA, the prints, the testimony from the Texas couple who pointed across the courtroom at the man who had come at them with a knife on a dark highway outside of Amarillo. I testified too. Sat on that stand and walked through every detail of the worst night of my life, while Boyd Driscoll watched me from the defense table with that same blank expression I had seen in the wash of headlights on the road. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, life without parole. When they walked him out in handcuffs, he turned and looked directly at me. No smile, no words, just a long, flat stare that lasted until the bailiff pushed him through the door. I have seen that look in my dreams more times than I can count. It has been almost 2 years now. I sold the Subaru. I sold the apartment. I moved to a small town in Vermont, a place Nora and I had always talked about retiring to someday, a place that still has her fingerprints on it, even though she never went there. Her sister checks in on me regularly, sends me pictures of her kids. I go to therapy twice a week. I take medication that helps me sleep without dreaming most nights. Some days are genuinely better than others. Some days I can almost believe that the weight on my chest is beginning to lift. But then a car horn honks unexpectedly, or I see a dark pickup truck in a parking lot, or someone walks a little too close behind me on a quiet street, and all of it comes back as if no time has passed at all. I am sharing this because I need people to understand that it happens to real people on ordinary nights when they are just trying to get from one place to another. If someone flags you down on an empty road at night, do not stop. Keep driving. Call 911 and let the professionals handle it, because the 5 minutes you save by being a good Samaritan might cost you everything you have ever loved. Nora would have told you the same thing. She was always the planner between the two of us, the one who thought things through. I just wish that night I had done the same. Story 2. The Hitchhiker. Carla had been asleep for a little over an hour when I saw the man on the shoulder. We were somewhere past Redding, deep into that desolate central corridor of California, where the landscape sheds its green and turns to brown hills and dry brush, and the occasional dead-looking tree that stands like a question mark against the pale sky. We had left Portland before sunrise, heading south to Sacramento for her cousin's wedding, a trip we had decided to do in one straight shot to save the cost of a motel. Carla and I had been together since Oregon State, married in 2017, and between her nursing shifts and my work as an electrician, actual road trips had become rare enough that this one felt like a small event. We had packed the cooler the night before, argued briefly over the playlist, and agreed on a compromise of alternating podcasts and music that mostly held up through Oregon. The first 6 hours had been peaceful. September had delivered one of those perfect coastal days that feels like a personal apology for all the grey ones, and I drove with the window cracked, listening to the steady rhythm of the highway. Carla fell asleep somewhere around Shasta, her head against the window, one hand loosely holding her phone. I saw the truck first, a silver pickup with its hood propped open, sitting on the shoulder with that particular stillness of a vehicle that had been there a while. And beside it, a man waving his arms with the slow, tired arc of someone who had been doing it long enough to have given up expecting a quick response. I eased off the gas and Carla stirred awake, squinting through the windshield at the scene ahead. He looked ordinary in the way that the word ordinary can carry when you think about it afterward. Jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, a faded baseball cap pulled low over graying stubble, mid-40s probably, with the kind of weathered face that comes from working outdoors in real conditions for real years. His truck had California plates and a gym bag sat at his feet, which registered as normal to me at the time, the kind of detail you file away without examining. Carla and I did one of those brief silent conversations that couples have after years of practice. She looked at me. I looked at her. We both looked at the man. She shrugged, and I pulled over about 50 feet past him. He came to my window with the expression of a man who had just found water after a long walk through the desert. Relieved, grateful, slightly embarrassed. He explained that his fuel pump had failed without warning, that he had been out here nearly 2 hours, that nobody had stopped. He was heading to Stockton to visit his daughter, he said, and just needed a lift to the next town with a mechanic, maybe 20 or 30 miles down the road. His name was Greg, or at least that was what he offered, and he had a slight southern drawl that gave his words a quality of easy friendliness. Carla looked at me. Daylight, 2 of us, 1 of him. I told Greg to grab his bag and get in the back. He thanked us multiple times, perhaps 1 time too many if I had been paying closer attention, and settled himself behind Carla. His gym bag went on his lap. I pulled back onto the interstate and watched him in the rearview mirror once briefly and saw only a man adjusting his cap and looking out the window. The first 15 minutes were so completely normal that I wonder now if he had calibrated them deliberately. He made small talk about the weather, asked where we were headed, mentioned he had worked construction before his back gave out. Carla, who is constitutionally friendly in a way that I have always admired and occasionally worried about, asked him questions about his daughter. He answered with the kind of vague detail that seemed natural in the moment. She was in college, studying computers, lived with her boyfriend near downtown. It was the GPS he started watching that first made something catch in me like a hook. I noticed it in small increments, his eyes moving to the map screen whenever I glanced in the mirror, the way they tracked the route marker. At one point, he asked how far we were from the next exit, and when I said about 12 miles, he nodded and went quiet in a way that had weight to it, a silence that was different from the silences that had come before. Carla shot me a sideways glance that I understood without translation. When we reached the exit for a small town called Cottonwood, I signaled to take the off-ramp. This was the logical stop. Services, probably a mechanic, everything a stranded motorist would need. But Greg's voice came from the back seat before I could merge, and the quality of it had changed completely. "Keep going straight," he said. "This town is no good. Nothing open on Thursdays." I looked at Carla. She had turned slightly toward the back seat, I told Greg this was the exit he had described, the next town with services. He shook his head and insisted we continue to the one after. He had a friend who worked at a garage there, he said. Someone who would give him a deal. I missed the exit. Looking back, I understand that this was the moment the calculation shifted. He had declined the reasonable solution, fabricated a reason to keep us driving, and done it in a tone that was no longer asking but directing. The friendly southern drawl had not disappeared entirely, but it had thinned, like a coat of paint with not quite enough coverage. The next 20 minutes were among the most slowly unfolding experiences of my life. Greg began giving unsolicited directions, narrating upcoming signs as if I could not read them, dismissing every service station and rest stop I mentioned with practiced impatience. And his right hand had stopped resting on top of the gym bag. It was resting inside it. I decided to test the situation directly. I told him we were running low on gas and would need to stop at the next station. He leaned forward between the seats, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke baked into his clothes, and he looked at the fuel gauge. I have driven enough miles to know what the needle looks like on a quarter tank, and he knew what he was looking at. You have got enough to make it another 40 miles, he said. There is a better spot up ahead. Trust me. Carla's hand had found my knee and was pressing into it steadily, and I understood completely. She was rigid in her seat. Her chest was moving fast. Greg started talking, then in the way that people sometimes do when they want you to understand something without saying it directly. He mentioned he had done time, casually, the way you mention having lived in a particular city once. He said he had made mistakes when he was younger, got mixed up with the wrong people, spent some years in a facility up north. He talked about how people judge you based on your past, how they see a record and think they know everything about you. He was staring at the back of Carla's head while he said this. People just need to help a man get where he is going without asking too many questions, he said. I mumbled something agreeable. Carla nodded without turning around. We were both doing the same thing, buying time, keeping him calm, trying to think past the fear to what came next. And then, through the windshield, I saw red and blue lights in the distance. A cluster of patrol cars on the shoulder, officers standing outside, a checkpoint. I watched Carla sit up straighter. Hope is a physical thing when it arrives after that kind of fear. It moves through the body like a current. She felt it the same moment I did. But Greg saw it too. He leaned forward, and his hand was fully inside the bag now, gripping something I could not see, and his voice came out flat and sharp and stripped of everything that had once resembled friendliness. Take the next exit, he said. Do it now before we get any closer. The exit was half a mile ahead, a rural route into empty farmland, no towns on the map for miles. I want to be clear about what he was asking. He was asking me to take my wife onto a deserted road with him, away from the only visible authorities for miles, with his hand closed around something inside a bag. He was asking us to trade one danger for a certain one. Carla made the decision. She pointed at the dashboard and announced in a panicked voice that the engine temperature was spiking, that we were going to blow the radiator if we did not pull over immediately. It was a lie delivered with a nurse's authority, and she sold it completely. I understood her immediately. I flicked on the hazard lights and began slowing, pulling toward the shoulder about a quarter mile before the checkpoint, close enough that the officers could see us. Far enough that Greg might think he had room to run. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I told him the car was overheating. I had no choice. We would be stuck in the middle of the highway if I did not stop. He looked at the police lights ahead. He looked at the open fields to the right. He looked at the two of us. And for a long, breathless stretch of seconds that I will never fully be able to describe from the inside, I genuinely did not know what was about to happen. I could feel it in the air, a pressure like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air itself seems to make a decision. The car rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder. No one moved for 3 full seconds. Then Greg said, quietly, almost to himself, "Stay in the car." He grabbed the gym bag and opened the rear door. He did not run immediately. He walked quickly, deliberately, heading away from the highway toward a tree line maybe 200 yards across the field. He did not look back. When he reached the edge of the field, he broke into a jog and disappeared into the brush. Carla grabbed my arm. We sat there frozen, watching the place where he had vanished, neither of us willing to move until it was very clear that he was not coming back. Then she was in my arms across the center console, shaking, her face buried in my shoulder, and I held her, and we just sat there in the particular kind of silence that follows something that almost happened. An officer from the checkpoint approached our car a few minutes later, a tall woman with a calm face, and asked if we were having car trouble. I told her the truth, all of it. Her expression changed while I talked. She radioed to her colleagues as she asked for a description. When I finished describing Greg, she told us what they were doing out here. They were looking for someone matching that description in connection with an armed robbery 2 counties north, a gas station where the clerk had been beaten badly. The suspect had carjacked a truck to escape and had been spotted heading south on this very highway. Our highway. The truck he had carjacked was silver. I sat with that for a long moment. We had driven for over an hour with someone capable of that kind of violence sitting 3 feet behind my wife's head. And the only thing that stood between us and whatever he had planned was a nurse's quick thinking and a patrol unit that happened to be working a checkpoint on the right stretch of road. Carla and I did not speak for the next 50 miles. The radio stayed off. We held hands across the console and we drove, and neither of us tried to fill the silence because there was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying for us. If you are driving a long distance and someone asks you for a lift, understand this. Kindness is not weakness and caution is not cruelty. But there is a version of helpfulness that can get you killed, and the people who take advantage of it are counting on the fact that you were raised to believe otherwise. Trust the instinct that says something is wrong, even when everything looks ordinary. Especially when everything looks ordinary. Story 3. The Curve. If you have never been inside a vehicle when it leaves a road, I will tell you that the last thing you feel before impact is not fear. It is stillness. A single half-second where time seems to pause and the world outside the windows makes no sense because the world outside the windows is moving wrong. The trees going sideways, the sky appearing where the road should be, the headlights cutting through nothing. Then everything happens at once. We were 5, packed into Corey's dad's old Suburban. It was March 2023, spring break, our first real trip since graduating together the year before. Class of 2022, and that number meant something to us then, the way class years do when you are still close enough to them to wear them like an identity. There was Corey behind the wheel, his girlfriend Megan in the middle row, me in the passenger seat, and Dante and Leia crammed into the back with our bags and a cooler. We had pooled money for an Austin trip, rented a house in the city for 4 days, and the whole thing had the feeling of a door closing graciously before the actual weight of adult life swung it shut. The plan to drive through the night rather than stop at a motel was Corey's, and we all agreed to it with the particular stupidity of people who have underestimated how long a night can be. The weather turned somewhere past the Texas-Oklahoma border, not dramatically at first, just the sky pressing lower and the rain beginning in earnest, a steady curtain of it against the windshield that made the wiper blades work at a frequency that had something almost hypnotic about it. Dante opened the whiskey somewhere around then and passed it forward, and I took a drink and felt the warmth go down and watched the rain and thought about how good this was going to be. The whole trip, all of it. How we were going to talk about it for years. By midnight, the rain had changed character. It was no longer a curtain. It was a wall. We were on a state highway somewhere in Texas, number I cannot remember, pitch black on both sides, no street lights, no other traffic, and the wipers were fighting a losing battle against what was coming down. Corey had been driving for close to 5 hours, and I could see it on him. The heavy blink, the repeated face rub. The window cracked to let cold air hit him, even though it also let in moisture that beaded on the interior surfaces and made everything feel damp. Megan suggested we pull over and rest for a few hours, and Corey waved her off. 3 more hours, he said. Stopping now would be stupid when we are so close. Dante laughed and made a comment about Corey being a lightweight. And Corey grabbed the bottle and took a long drink just to prove something that did not need proving. I should have said something. I have spent 2 years understanding that I should have said something, that the thing I chose instead, which was to tell myself it was fine, that we were almost there, that Corey had driven this late before, was not a neutral choice. Silence in those moments is a choice. It just does not announce itself as one. By 1 in the morning, Megan and Leia were asleep. Dante was on his phone, its blue light making his face look spectral in the dark. I was fighting my own eyelids, pinching my forearm, doing the pathetic small tricks of someone who has already lost the battle they are still pretending to fight. The heater was running, and the rain was white noise, and the car was warm, and somewhere between one pinch and the next I was drifting. The curve came out of nowhere. That is not precisely true. There was a sign, a yellow warning chevron that I think I saw in the outer edge of my vision a half-second before Corey registered it. But a half-second is not enough when you are doing highway speed on a rain-slicked road with a driver who has been awake for going on 20 hours and has alcohol running alongside the exhaustion. He saw it and yanked the wheel. The overcorrection sent us into a skid. I felt it in my stomach before I understood what was happening, that sickening lateral slide when the tires lose their argument with the asphalt, and the vehicle becomes something other than a vehicle, becomes a projectile operating on the logic of momentum rather than control. Megan screamed from the back, the kind of scream that bypasses language entirely, just pure biological alarm going straight up through the throat. Corey pumped the brakes, which you are not supposed to do, and the back end came around in a long, terrible arc, and the guardrail appeared in my window, and I had exactly enough time to think "oh" before we hit it. The impact was a sound I felt in my teeth, but we did not stop at the guardrail. We went through it or over it, the geometry of it still unclear to me even now, and then we were in the air, and then we were rolling. I counted 2 rolls in real time and learned later from the police report that it was 3. What I experienced was a chaos of sensation where up and down ceased to be reliable categories, and every surface of the car became a surface that could hurt you. Glass, metal, the door handle driving itself into my hip, my head connecting with the window in a way that made a sound I heard from the inside. The seat belt doing what it was designed to do, which is to say, saving my life while also doing significant damage to my ribs and collarbone in the process. When the car stopped moving, we were upside down in a ditch. The engine was still running. The headlights were on, pointing at mud and broken branches. I was hanging from my seat belt with blood running from a cut in my forehead down across my face and dripping steadily onto the crushed roof below me, and there was a high-pitched tone in my ears that was consuming all other sound. For several seconds, I existed in that tone and nothing else. Then it faded, and I heard Megan crying. Not screaming anymore, crying in that broken, gasping way that sounds like someone trying to breathe through damage. I called Corey's name. He did not answer. He was slumped forward in his harness, his arms hanging loose toward the ceiling below, blood on his face, and the steering wheel crushed against his chest in a way that made something cold move through me. I found my belt buckle eventually and dropped hard onto the ceiling, landing on broken glass and pieces of dashboard plastic. And the pain in my left shoulder hit me immediately, sharp and nauseating, the shoulder dislocated, though I did not know that yet. I crawled toward Corey and grabbed his face and said his name over and over. He was breathing. Shallow, irregular movements of his chest that looked like effort rather than reflex, but breathing. The gash running from his hairline to his eyebrow was bleeding in the rhythmic pumping way that tells you a vessel is involved. Behind me, Dante was groaning and Leia was calling out in a high, panicked voice. Megan had gone quiet, which was worse. When I turned to check on her, I saw her arm and looked away, because some things, once seen, take a long time to integrate. Dante managed to kick out the rear window. I heard the glass give, and then heard him dragging himself out on his elbows, cursing continuously in the particular way of someone who is in real pain, and using language as a form of endurance. Leia climbed out after him, and immediately started shouting for help into the storm, her voice swallowed by rain the moment it left her mouth. I stayed with Corey and Megan. I talked to them about stupid things, desperate things, whatever came to mind to keep their attention anchored. I told Corey about the time we skipped class freshman year to go fishing and caught nothing, and ended up eating gas station burritos on the hood of his car, watching the sunset over the water. I told Megan about the ring I knew was sitting in the bottom of Corey's bag, the one he had shown me 3 weeks ago with shaking hands, the one he was planning to bring out at the end of the Austin trip. My phone was destroyed. Dante's had disappeared during the crash. Leia had hers, tucked in a jacket pocket, and she called 911 and tried to explain where we were while the dispatcher kept asking for landmarks we did not have. All she could tell them was that we were in a ditch, that it was dark, that her friends were dying. That word hit me in the chest the first time I heard her use it. Dying. I had not let myself think it until she said it out loud, and then I could not unthink it. The ambulance took 47 minutes. Leia's phone showed the call duration when they finally arrived. 47 minutes of sitting in the rain in the wreck of the car, holding my best friend's hand and counting his breaths. At some point, Megan started shivering violently despite the temperature being mild. Shock, I know now. Dante had dragged himself to a tree and was leaning against it, his lips going a color I had never seen on a living person before. When I saw the lights up on the road, I cried in a way I had not since childhood. The paramedics rappelled down into the ditch because it was too steep for a stretcher. Hospital, fluorescent lights, people asking questions I could not answer. They relocated my shoulder without warning, and I screamed loud enough that a nurse ran in from down the hall. 13 stitches in my forehead, a concussion, 2 cracked ribs I did not know about until the X-ray. I was the lucky one. Dante shattered both kneecaps, surgery that same night. Megan's arm broken in 3 places, internal bleeding, emergency surgery. Lara fractured collarbone and whiplash so severe she could not turn her head for weeks. And Corey, the one who had told us all he could drive through anything, was in a medically induced coma for 4 days. Traumatic brain injury, swelling in the skull. They drilled a hole to relieve the pressure. His mother flew in from Michigan and found me in the waiting room and grabbed me by the shoulders and asked me why we had not stopped, why we had not just found a motel. And I had no answer that felt adequate, because there was no answer that was adequate. We saved $100. That was the whole math of it. We saved $100 and paid for it in a currency that had many more zeros. Corey woke up on the 5th day. He did not remember the crash. His last clear memory was the Texas border and Dante handing him the bottle. The doctor said the brain does that, protects itself by erasing the thing that injured it. I wished mine would do the same. It did not. Corey spent 3 weeks in the hospital and 2 months in physical therapy, learning to walk a straight line again. Dante still walks with a limp. Megan never got full range of motion back in her arm. She and Corey broke up about 6 months after the accident. Not because of any fight, but because every time she looked at him, she saw that night. That is what she told Leia. Some things break in ways that cannot be repaired regardless of how much care you bring to them. The 5 of us barely speak anymore. Not because anyone is angry, because being together means remembering. It means seeing Dante's limp and the scar on my forehead, and the particular way Megan holds her arm against her body when she is cold, and feeling the night come back through all of those small physical facts. If you are on a road trip and the driver is tired and someone makes a joke about pulling over being weak, it is not a joke. It is a moment. There is a chain of events that begins at that moment and does not end anywhere good, and the only way to break the chain is to say something, even if it is awkward, even if they roll their eyes, even if you are only 2 or 3 hours out and it feels stupid to stop. It felt stupid to stop. We did not stop. We saved $100. Story 4: The Canyon. Before I get into this, I want you to do something for me. If you are watching Creepyverse for the first time, subscribe right now, because the stories we tell here are not the kind you run out of quickly. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop a new one. And leave a comment below telling me which story is scaring you the most so far. Because this next one, this one about an elderly couple on a quiet highway, and the men who were waiting for them, is the one that stays with me longest. Now let us continue. Patty and I had been married for 41 years when we finally took the cross-country trip we had been postponing since our youngest graduated college back in 2008. I had retired from the Postal Service 2 years prior, and Patty had just finished her last semester teaching 4th grade at Ridgemont Elementary. Our granddaughter Ellie was turning 5 in Arizona, and our son Craig kept insisting we make the drive out rather than fly. He wanted us to experience the open road, he said, to see the landscapes we had only ever talked about over dinner. So we bought a used camper, a 2014 Winnebago Adventurer that still had good bones beneath its faded exterior. We spent 3 weeks getting it road ready, checking every seal and hose and belt, going over it with the thoroughness of people who have learned, through 41 years of life, that small neglected things have a way of becoming large important things when you are far from home. Patty picked out new curtains, pale blue with little white flowers, and I installed a better radio system for her audiobooks. We mapped the route carefully. We planned stops at national parks and small diners with good reviews. We towed our old Subaru on a hitch bar behind the camper, figuring we would need a smaller vehicle once we reached Craig's place. We left Cedar Falls, Iowa on a Saturday morning in late September, the kind of morning where the air smells like wood smoke and the trees have started making their annual argument about color. Our neighbors came out to wave from the porch as we pulled out of the driveway. I remember thinking that this was the most prepared I had ever been for anything, and that the trip was going to be exactly what it was supposed to be. I had no idea. By the 3rd day, we had crossed into Colorado and were navigating the kind of isolated highway where the cell signal disappeared around noon and did not return. The landscape had transformed from flat Midwestern farmland into a terrain of red rock formations and canyon walls and scrub brush, beautiful in a way that Patty documented every few minutes with her phone camera, already composing the captions in her head that she planned to send Craig once we had signal again. We stopped for gas at a small station outside a place called Elwood Springs, population about 300 by the faded sign at the junction. The station was one of those old-fashioned operations with 2 pumps and a convenience store attached that smelled like motor oil and cold cuts. A man came out to help us, which surprised me because I had not seen full service in years. He was tall and wiry, maybe in his 50s, with deep sun lines carved into his face, and a denim jacket that looked like it had been worn through every season for the past decade. His name tag said Roy. Roy smiled at us and asked where we were headed, and I told him Arizona to see family. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had never been clean, and then he told me something about the route we were planning to take. Highway 84 through the canyon pass, he said, had been having trouble lately. Breakdowns, mechanical problems in spots where tow trucks took hours to reach. He suggested we take the alternate route through Millbrook instead, adding 2 hours to the drive, but keeping us on busier roads. Patty and I exchanged a look. We had planned this route specifically for the canyon views. 2 extra hours meant arriving after dark. I thanked Roy, told him we would stick to our original plan. He did not argue. He just handed me the receipt and told us to be careful out there. As we pulled away, I saw him in the side mirror, still standing by the pumps, watching us until we disappeared around the bend. Patty said he seemed nice, just a little odd. I agreed and pushed the unease aside because I did not want to color the rest of the drive with it. Highway 84 was everything we had hoped for from a landscape perspective. The canyon walls rose on both sides, striped in layers of orange and brown and deep purple where the shadows fell. And Patty had her window down taking photographs every few minutes while I navigated the narrow road with the careful attention it demanded. The road was barely wide enough for 2 vehicles, and the combination of its curves and the weight of the camper and the towed Subaru made everything feel slower and heavier than usual. We had not seen another car in over an hour, which felt peaceful at first. Then I noticed the white pickup truck in my rearview mirror. It was far back initially, just a point of light against the canyon walls. But over the next 20 minutes, it gradually closed the distance until it was sitting maybe 50 yards behind us. Close enough to be clearly following, too far to read the driver. Patty noticed me watching the mirror and turned around to look. She said it was probably just someone else heading through the canyon. Probably nothing. I kept watching. The pickup stayed behind us for 30 minutes without passing. When I slowed, it slowed. When I nudged the speed up, it matched me precisely. There was a patience to it that felt wrong, like it was not trying to go somewhere so much as stay with us specifically. I suggested we pull over at the next scenic overlook and let the truck pass. We found one about 10 minutes later, a gravel pullout with a small wooden sign. I eased off the road and waited for the pickup to cruise past. It did not cruise past. It slowed as it approached, almost to a crawl, and I got my first clear look at the driver as he passed. A younger man, mid-30s, with a shaved head and a thick beard covering most of his face. Dark sunglasses despite the sun being behind the canyon walls. He stared directly at us as he passed, his head tracking our position, and I saw his lips moving. Patty grabbed my arm and asked if I saw that. I told her yes. We sat in silence for a long moment, engine idling, wind moving through the canyon in a low moan. I wanted to turn around. I told Patty we should go back to Elwood Springs and take the alternate route, but she pointed out that we had already driven over an hour into the canyon, and the map showed a small town called Hadley only about 45 minutes ahead. Going back meant losing daylight. She suggested we push through to Hadley. It made sense, logically, and I told myself the man was probably just a curious local, that people in isolated places noticed outsiders. So I put the camper in drive and pulled back onto the highway and kept my eyes moving between the road ahead and the mirror behind. For 20 minutes, nothing. The canyon walls began to give way to pine forest on the slopes, and Patty relaxed by increments. I allowed myself to breathe. Then we came around a sharp bend, and I slammed the brakes so hard that Patty lurched against her seat belt, and our coffee thermos bounced off the dashboard. The white pickup was parked sideways across the road, blocking both lanes completely. The driver was standing in front of it with his arms folded, watching us. He had removed his sunglasses, and even from 50 feet away, I could see that his eyes were pale, almost colorless, like ice that has picked up dirt. From the trees on the right side of the road, 2 more men emerged. One was short and stocky in a camouflage jacket, carrying something in his right hand that I could not identify. The other was taller and thinner, with long, greasy hair and a cigarette hanging from his lip. They walked slowly toward the pickup, flanking the bald man, and all 3 of them watched our camper approach with expressions of flat anticipation. Not excitement, not aggression, exactly. Just the calm, business-like demeanor of people who expected this to go a particular way. Patty whispered my name in a voice I had not heard from her in 41 years. I threw the camper into reverse and pressed the gas. But before I had moved more than a few feet, I heard an engine behind us. In my side mirror, a rusted brown sedan had pulled up to block our retreat, stopping about 20 yards back. A 4th man stepped out, older than the others, with grey stubble and a hunting rifle resting against his shoulder with the casual ease of a tool rather than a weapon. We were boxed in. A narrow canyon road with rock walls on our left and dense forest on our right, and men in front of us and behind us, and no signal on either phone, and not a single other vehicle having passed in the direction of Hadley in over an hour. 41 years, 2 kids, a whole life of ordinary, accumulated, beautiful days, and none of it had come with any instruction for this moment. The bald man walked toward my window. He stopped about 10 feet away, tilted his head, and in a calm, almost friendly voice told me we could do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way, he said, meant stepping out with our hands visible and cooperating. They wanted the camper and our cash, and then they would let us walk to Hadley. I wanted to believe him. There was a part of me in that moment that was desperate to believe this was simply a robbery, that the cost would be material rather than mortal, that we would lose things that could be replaced. But I looked at the other men, at the way the stocky one kept tapping whatever was in his hand against his thigh, at the 4th man with the rifle, whose posture said this was not the first time he had stood in this configuration on this road. And I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic and went straight to something older, that they had no intention of walking us anywhere. Patty knew it too. She squeezed my hand, and I felt her rings cut into my fingers. I told her to hold on. And then I floored the gas pedal in reverse. The camper shot backward. The older man dove away from the sedan and dropped his rifle, and I heard the sickening crunch of the Subaru's front end connecting with the sedan's grille. The impact spun the sedan sideways, just enough to open a gap on the left of the road. I threw the camper into drive and cranked the wheel, and the tires screamed against the asphalt as we pushed through the gap. The bald man's fist connected with my window and left a spiderweb crack across my vision. The stocky man ran alongside us, and I saw what he was carrying, a crowbar, and it connected with the side of the camper with a sound that shook the whole vehicle, but we were moving, and I kept the gas pedal down. I watched them scrambling in my mirror, running for their vehicles. We had minutes at best. The camper was damaged. I could feel it in the steering, a hard pull to the right, and the engine had developed a grinding note that had not been there before. The Subaru was dragging behind us with one front tire blown, sparking against the pavement. I kept driving. There was no alternative to driving. Patty was checking her phone every few seconds, praying for one bar, finding nothing. 15 minutes later, the engine began to shudder, and the burning smell filled the cab, and the temperature gauge climbed into the red. The radiator hit in the collision. I could not keep going. I found a dirt road branching off the highway, partly hidden by overgrown brush, and turned onto it and drove a quarter-mile into the trees before killing the engine. Then we abandoned the camper on foot. We took what we could carry quickly: water, flashlight, phones, my wallet. I looked at the ruined Subaru and left it. We went into the forest, moving away from the dirt road, trying to be quiet, trying to move with purpose rather than panic. Patty held my hand tight enough that I could feel every heartbeat in her fingers. We walked for 20 minutes through brush and failing light until we found a small ravine with a rocky overhang. We crawled underneath and pressed ourselves against the cold stone. The darkness came fast, and then, from back toward the highway, I heard engines, more than one. Headlights swept through the trees, back and forth, like search beams. Voices called to each other through the forest, and I could not make out the words, and I did not need to. Patty buried her face in my shoulder to muffle any sound, and I held her and felt her shaking and watched the light between the trees. We stayed under that overhang for hours. Time lost its structure in the dark. Patty fell into a fitful half-sleep against my chest, making small sounds I had never heard from her before. I stayed awake and watched. The voices eventually faded. The headlights disappeared. Mosquitoes found us, and I did not swat at them because even that small motion felt like a risk. Around what I judged to be 3 or 4 in the morning, an orange glow rose above the tree line in the direction of the camper. It grew brighter, and I could smell smoke moving through the forest. They were burning it. Whether to destroy evidence or simply out of frustration, I cannot say. I held Patty tighter and watched the glow pulse until the first grey light of dawn began to dilute it. When we could see clearly enough to walk, we crawled out from under the overhang and started east toward where I thought the highway must be. It took us nearly 4 hours to reach pavement, and another hour walking the shoulder before a truck driver named Glenn Barker spotted us and pulled over without asking a single question. He drove us straight to the sheriff's station in Hadley. Craig drove through the night to meet us. The police found our camper 2 days later, burned to the frame. The Subaru was found 6 miles away, stripped of its plates, left on a logging road. 3 weeks after that, they arrested a man named Wesley Grubb, the bald man with the pale eyes, after he attempted the same operation on another couple passing through the canyon. His record went back 20 years. Armed robbery, assault, vehicle theft. He was linked to at least 2 disappearances in that region where the victims had never been found. The other 3 men scattered and were never identified. Wesley never confessed, never explained what they had intended. He sat through his hearings with the same flat anticipation I had seen on that road, the expression of a man who had done a thing enough times that it no longer required a particular emotion. We never took another road trip. The Winnebago was gone, and neither of us had any desire to replace it. Some roads are not meant to be traveled, and some memories cannot be left behind no matter how far you drive. I think about it sometimes in the quiet of the house when Patty is asleep. I think about what would have happened if I had listened to that man's calm voice and believed the lie about walking to Hadley. We would be 2 more names on a list of people who drove into a canyon one afternoon and were never seen again. We got out because of one decision made in a fraction of a second. One moment of refusing to believe what we were being told. Sometimes the only thing between you and the worst thing is that one fraction of a second where you choose correctly. Story 5. The Fake Cop. Right now, before we go into the next story, I need you to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. Creepyverse exists because of people who come back for every story, who share these with their friends, who leave comments at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet, and these stories suddenly feel very real. We are all in this together. Now let us continue. because this next one is one of the most disturbing things I have ever read. And I say that having read a lot of disturbing things. 5 of us were in Garrett's old Chevy Suburban on a Friday night in March 2024, heading from Austin to New Orleans for a bachelor party weekend. Milo was getting married in 2 months, and the rest of us, me, Owen, Lucas, and Garrett, had pulled our money together for a house in the French Quarter and taken the day off work. I had just turned 26. I was working as a paralegal at a small downtown firm, and this trip felt like the kind of release valve you need before your 20s start compressing themselves into something more serious. We left around 8 in the evening, figuring we would drive through the night and arrive by early morning. The energy in the car for the first few hours was everything that energy is supposed to be when you are 20-something, and the road is open, and the person next to you is someone you have been laughing with since college. We ate badly, argued about music, roasted Milo about finally growing up. Then we crossed into Louisiana, somewhere past the Texas border on a stretch of Interstate 10 that was becoming increasingly empty. The billboards had disappeared, and the trees had taken over, dense black walls on both sides, pressing close to the highway. Traffic had thinned until there were stretches where we were the only headlights visible in either direction. I was somewhere between awake and drifting when Garrett sat up straighter and squinted into the rearview mirror. Red and blue lights had appeared behind us, not just a flash, a full sustained strobe, painting the interior of the Suburban in alternating color. Owen woke up asking what was going on. Garrett was already slowing, pulling toward the shoulder with the compliance of someone who has been stopped enough times to have the reflex trained into them. The vehicle that had pulled us over was a dark SUV, black or deep navy, and the first thing I noticed, even before it fully registered why it mattered, was that there were no visible markings on it. No department name along the door, no star insignia, no official identification of any kind. The light bar on the roof sat at a slight angle, like someone had mounted it themselves without a level. The lights looked almost right. Almost. We sat on the shoulder for longer than usual before the driver's door opened. When the man stepped out, the second thing I noticed was the way he walked. Not the careful, controlled approach of an officer trained to approach an unknown vehicle with professional caution. He moved quickly, almost eagerly, and he covered the distance to Garrett's window without the measured pace that says I am doing this by procedure. He was wearing dark clothing that resembled a uniform, but was not one. A plain black shirt with no badge, no name tag, no department patch. A belt with items attached that I could not identify in the dark. His face was gaunt, the eyes deeply set, and in the red glow reflecting off his own tail lights, they caught the light in a way that made them look as if they had no depth to them. He smiled at Garrett through the window. It was the smile of someone who had been practicing it, but had never quite gotten to the point where it reached his eyes. He asked for license and registration in a voice that was too casual, too relaxed, like the opening line of a conversation he had started many times before. Garrett handed them over, and the man took them without looking at them, just held them loosely in his hand while he scanned the inside of the Suburban with his eyes, taking inventory of each of us in turn. The questions that came next were where everything slid sideways. He asked where we were headed, which was normal enough. But then he asked how long we planned to stay, whether anyone was expecting us, whether we had told our families exactly which route we were taking, whether anyone knew precisely where we were. Milo said we were heading to New Orleans for the weekend, trying to keep the answer brief and unrevealing, because by then all 5 of us could feel that something was wrong, even if none of us had named it yet. The man nodded slowly, cataloging the answer. Then he pointed his flashlight directly at Lucas in the back seat and asked him specifically whether he had a girlfriend waiting at home. Lucas said yes, confused. The man asked whether she knew where he was right now, whether she would notice if he did not text her tonight. The question sat in the air between us and rotted there. I looked at Owen and Owen looked at me, and neither of us needed to say anything. Lucas had gone rigid. Milo's hand had found the door handle without him seeming to consciously decide to put it there. Garrett was gripping the wheel in a way that said he was running calculations. The man stepped back from the window and walked slowly around the front of the Suburban, dragging his fingers along the hood as he went. He stopped at the passenger side and knocked on Milo's window with one knuckle. When Milo cracked it, the man bent down and told Milo to step outside, just like that. Said it was standard procedure. Said it would only take a minute. Said he needed to speak with him privately. Milo asked why, asked what he had done. Something moved across the man's face. Something cold and impatient that the expression of friendliness snapped back over before it could fully surface. He repeated, in a voice that now had an edge beneath the casual surface, that he needed Milo to step out of the vehicle. And that was when Garrett saved us. He pulled out his phone and said, in the most apologetic, reasonable voice I have ever heard him use, that he was going to call 911 just to verify the stop. He said he had heard about incidents involving people impersonating officers and just wanted to make sure everything was official. He said it with genuine-sounding embarrassment, like a man who feels bad for being cautious. The man outside went through a complete transformation in approximately 1.5 seconds. The fake smile disappeared as if it had been switched off at the source. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved to his own vehicle and then to the open field beside the highway. He took a step back from the car and told Garrett, in a voice stripped of all pretense, that we were free to go. No explanation, no ticket, no reason given for why he had pulled us over in the first place. He did not even hand Garrett his license and registration. He dropped them on the ground outside the driver's door and walked back to his vehicle with an urgent pace that was nothing at all like the slow approach he had made. Owen said go. Garrett did not need to be told twice. We pulled back onto the highway and accelerated in silence. Nobody spoke for a full minute. I turned around to watch the SUV behind us, expecting headlights to follow. Instead, the red and blue lights simply turned off. The headlights cut out. The vehicle sat dead on the shoulder for a moment and then made a U-turn across the median, which is not a maneuver any legitimate law enforcement officer makes in any circumstance, and drove away in the opposite direction with no lights at all. We watched until it was gone. Then everyone started talking simultaneously, voices layering over each other with fragments of fear and disbelief, and the specific delayed release of adrenaline that arrives after the immediate danger has passed. Milo kept saying he had almost gotten out of the car, that he had actually reached for the door handle, that the only reason he had not pushed it open was because the questions got too strange. He kept coming back to that sentence. I almost got out. We drove for another 40 minutes without stopping, checking the mirrors every few seconds, before the lights of a gas station near an exit appeared ahead, and we pulled in without discussing it. Parked close to the entrance, close to the cameras and the other cars and the ordinary sounds of people going about ordinary business in the middle of the night. On the other side of the lot was a Louisiana State Trooper vehicle, a real one, proper markings, proper uniform, an officer inside doing paperwork. Owen said we should talk to him, tell him what happened. After a brief debate, we went. The trooper listened as Garrett described everything. The unmarked SUV, the crooked light bar, the plain black clothes with no badge, the invasive questions, the attempt to get Milo out of the vehicle alone. The trooper's expression changed while Garrett talked. By the time Garrett finished, the trooper was leaning forward in his seat. He told us there was no authorized unit operating in that area tonight. No sheriff's deputies, no state troopers, no federal vehicles. He said we needed to file an official report immediately. We spent the next 2 hours at a state police station giving statements to a detective who recorded every detail. The shape of the light bar, the exact wording of the questions, the man's hands, the long, dirty fingernails, the faded tattoo on his left wrist I could not read clearly in the dark. She wrote it all down without visible reaction, but when we finished, she thanked us in a way that carried weight. She told us that our description matched 2 other reports from the previous 18 months. Incidents on the same stretch of highway. Similar vehicle, similar man, similar pattern. She did not tell us what had happened in those other incidents. And in that moment, sitting under fluorescent lights in a state police office at 3 in the morning, I did not ask. Some answers make the world smaller in ways it does not recover from. The bachelor party was fine. We went through the motions, but none of us could fully shake what had happened, and Milo kept coming back to the door handle, to the feeling of it under his fingers, to the question of what the night would have looked like if he had pressed it down. Whoever that man was, he has not been caught. Not as of the last time Garrett heard from the detective. He is still out there, presumably, somewhere on a dark stretch of I-10, with a crooked light bar on a dark SUV, and a list of questions designed to find out whether the people inside the car will be missed. The only thing that saved us was Garrett's phone in his hand. If you are ever pulled over on a quiet road at night, and something about the stop does not feel right, you are allowed to call 911 to verify it. You are allowed to drive slowly to a lit, public area before stopping. You are allowed to say, politely, that you would like to verify the officer's identity before stepping out. Any legitimate law enforcement officer will understand and accommodate that request. Anyone who reacts the way that man reacted is not a legitimate officer. Remember that. Story 6. What we found at the turnoff. It was around 2 in the morning when we pulled off. My friend Grant and I were 6 hours into a 12-hour drive from Denver to Kansas City, running on gas station coffee and the specific low-grade misery of too many hours in a car seat. Grant had been driving since we passed the last rest stop, 40 miles back, and I had been watching his head do the slow, heavy lean of someone whose body was making unilateral decisions about sleep. I told him to pull over before he killed us both. The turnoff appeared on the right side of the highway, unmarked, unlit, a gravel patch carved into the edge of the tree line. No sign, no facilities, just a rectangle of gravel and darkness that represented, at 2 in the morning, the most appealing place I had seen in hours. Grant pulled in and parked near the edge where the gravel met the grass, and we both got out to stretch. The air was cold for September, the kind of cold that ignores your jacket and settles directly against your skin. Grant walked toward the tree line to take a leak. I paced around the car trying to shake the stiffness from my legs, watching our headlights cut pale beams into the darkness ahead. That was when I noticed the gravel. About 20 feet in front of our car, the surface was torn up. Not old disturbance, settled and wind-worn. Fresh. The tire marks were deep, the kind left when someone put serious power to the wheels in a hurry, and the edges of the grooves were still sharp. The soil beside them was disturbed in uneven mounds, pushed around in ways that gravel does not naturally arrange itself. I called Grant over. He came, saw it, and pulled out his phone flashlight. The beam was weak but sufficient. The tire marks were fresh enough that the edges showed no weather degradation at all. The disturbance in the soil alongside them was consistent with something having been dragged. The grass flattened in a path leading toward the tree line, too wide for an animal. Then I caught the smell. Faint at first, sweet and chemical, like gasoline mixed with something organic that had no business being outside on a cold September night. Grant stopped moving when he caught it. I took his phone and walked a few more steps toward the source. About 10 feet from the edge of the gravel, half hidden in tall grass, I found a pair of gloves. Disposable latex, the kind worn in medical settings or by people who do not want to leave prints. One of them was inside out, pulled off in a hurry. 5 feet further, I found the jacket. Dark denim or canvas, bundled and thrown. I moved the phone beam across it and my stomach turned completely. The back of it was soaked through in a way that dark fabric sometimes cannot entirely conceal. A dark stain that spread outward from the center in the way that liquids do when there is a significant quantity of them and gravity is involved. The fabric was saturated in places, and from the jacket, leading away into the brush, smears on the grass, drag marks. Clear, intentional, leading deeper into the dark. I stood up fast enough to lose my balance and caught myself, and Grant was right behind me, looking over my shoulder. He said something under his breath that was either a curse or a prayer, and might have been both. I turned the flashlight off. We started walking back toward the car, not running, deliberately not running, because running was the acknowledgement that we were in a situation where running was appropriate, and some part of both of us was still arguing against that conclusion. Each step on the gravel seemed too loud. Our breathing seemed too loud. The wind through the trees seemed too loud. Everything was too loud in a darkness that should have been empty and was clearly not. We were 15 feet from the car when Grant grabbed my shoulder and pointed. On the opposite side of the rest area, at the tree line we had not explored, a light. Faint and yellowish, barely visible through the branches. A flashlight beam, stationary, pointed in our direction. We stood and watched it. It did not move. It did not sweep, did not search, did not come closer. It simply sat there, pointing at us, existing in a way that said less about where it was and more about the fact that someone was behind it. Someone who was watching us and wanted us to know it. Then it turned off. Not swept away, not moved, off as if a decision had been made. The darkness that replaced it was thicker than the darkness before it. Grant and I looked at each other and broke for the car simultaneously. I yanked my door, he fumbled the keys, dropped them, picked them up with shaking hands, dropped them again. I could not find my voice to tell him to hurry because my voice had simply stopped being available. He got the key in the ignition. Engine over. He threw it into reverse, and we shot backward off the gravel onto the highway shoulder, tires spinning for a half second before they caught. I turned to look out the rear window. At the tree line where the light had been, a figure was standing, just standing. A shape at the edge of the dark, watching us leave. No features I could identify, no movement, just the shape, dark against darker, and the knowledge of what we had seen on the gravel between us and it. Grant said something I will not repeat and floored the accelerator. We hit the highway at a speed that fishtailed the back end before he got it corrected, and neither of us looked back again. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. My heart was audible to me. Grant's knuckles were white on the wheel. I kept watching the side mirror for headlights that might mean we were being followed, but the road behind us stayed empty. At a 24-hour gas station 30 miles down the road, we sat in the parking lot with the engine running for a full minute before either of us could make ourselves get out. Then we went inside under the fluorescent lights and stood there in the ordinary warmth of it and tried to reconstruct what we had just seen into something that had an innocent explanation. Latex gloves. Hunters do not wear latex gloves. A blood-soaked jacket does not get left in tall grass by accident. Drag marks that wide are not made by any animal native to that region. And someone in the trees had been watching us from the moment we arrived, had waited to see what we found, and had made the deliberate choice to let us know they were there before we left. I called 911 from the parking lot. The dispatcher sounded tired and patient and asked me for a location. I did not have a precise one. Somewhere between mile marker 80 and 120 on the eastbound highway from Denver. She asked if we had touched anything and I said no. She asked if we had seen anyone and I told her about the figure, the light turning off, the way they just stood there and watched us go. There was a pause on the line, and then she told me to stay on hold while she contacted the state patrol. We waited in that parking lot for almost an hour. A trooper called back eventually and said they were sending units to check the area. It might take a while to locate the exact spot. We made it to Kansas City around noon. I spent 3 days at the hospital with my father, sleeping poorly, jumping at sounds. Grant stayed with his cousin. We texted, but did not talk about it. There was an unspoken agreement to let it sit in the corner of the room rather than bring it into the center. On the 4th day, I received a call from a detective with the state patrol. He said they had found the rest area. He said they had found evidence of what he called a violent incident. He would not provide details over the phone and asked if I would come in to give a formal statement when I returned to Denver. I said yes. I asked if they had found anyone in the woods. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said they were still investigating and could not comment on an active case. The weight in his voice told me what I needed to know. I gave my statement a week later. The detective showed me photographs of the rest area taken in daylight, and it looked so ordinary I could barely connect it to what I had experienced at 2 in the morning. He confirmed that they had recovered the jacket and gloves. He confirmed the blood was human. He told me they had found other evidence deeper in the woods that he could not discuss. No suspects, no witnesses beyond Grant and me, no arrest then or since. I still check that region's news sometimes. I have found nothing that connects directly to what we saw. Whatever happened in those trees that night has not surfaced in any public record I can locate, which is a particular kind of horror, the kind that does not resolve, the kind that just continues quietly in the background of the world, whether you are paying attention to it or not. When I drive at night now, and I see a dark turnoff at the side of the road, no sign, no lights, just a gravel patch at the edge of the trees, I do not pull in. Not anymore. Some places are not what they look like in daylight, and some kinds of quiet are not silence. They are something waiting. Story 7, The Lodge. The listing promised clean rooms, hot showers, and old-fashioned quiet. My partner Sarah found it while I was driving, scrolling through booking sites on her phone, looking for something that would break the monotony of chain hotels and give us a story to laugh about later. We were in the middle of a long cross-country drive with the kids in the back seat, and we had been on the road long enough that the idea of a roadside lodge with character sounded genuinely appealing. The reviews were not alarming. A handful of comments about the remote location and the lack of amenities, but nothing that flagged as a warning. The photos showed a small rustic building with a wide front porch and a sign that had seen better decades. When the GPS led us down a narrow gravel road, the isolation felt like atmosphere rather than reason for concern. Fields on both sides, no other structures visible, the kind of quiet that city people romanticize. The lodge appeared at the end of the road like something paused in time, sitting back from the gravel with faded signage and windows fogged by years of grime. The paint came off the siding in long strips. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the parking lot in the patient way of things that have been left alone long enough to reclaim the space. There were no other vehicles in the lot, not near the entrance, not anywhere. A man came out of the office door as we pulled up, and something about him was immediately wrong in a way I could not immediately name. He stood in the doorway rather than coming to meet us, which is what you do when someone pulls into your business. He was dressed in clothes that looked slept in rather than worn, and his posture had a stiffness to it that suggested effort. He spoke politely when I went to him, answered my questions about the room in short, complete sentences, and never once met my eyes directly. Inside the office, half the lights were off. A dusty fan moved the air without cooling it. The room he showed us was functional in the way of a thing that has been cleaned to the minimum threshold of acceptability rather than to any standard that involves genuine care. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon light and made the space feel compressed. I noticed a smell I could not identify, damp wood, and something underneath it that was almost sweet. Sarah and I exchanged the look that married parents develop for communicating privately in front of children. The look that says, I am noticing what you are noticing, but we do not name it yet. While I was unpacking, I heard the noise. It came from behind the building, deep and irregular, like something heavy being shifted or dragged across a hard surface. Not a mechanical sound, not the thump of a water heater or the clunk of an ice machine. Something manual, something that required effort and was not being done quietly, but was also not announcing itself. Sarah tried the side exit near the vending machines and found it locked from the outside. Not stuck, not warped from age, locked deliberately with no release mechanism visible from inside. She tried another door near the back stairwell and found the same thing. I went outside for air while she stayed with the kids, and behind the dumpster at the rear corner of the building, I found a worn backpack, a single sneaker, and a phone case cracked lengthwise down the center. They were not arranged like garbage left for pickup. They were tucked, hidden, pushed out of sight with some deliberateness. The noise started again, while I was standing there looking at them. I went back inside and did not say anything about what I had found, because the children were there and asking questions with their eyes, and we had already made the decision before I got back to the room. We made it the way adults sometimes make decisions that are too important to announce, which is to say quietly and quickly and without drama. Sarah told the kids to put their shoes back on and grab their bags without explaining why. I walked to the office and told the man we were leaving that something had come up and returned his key. He was not surprised. That was the detail that stayed with me longest after. He was not surprised, did not ask why, did not offer to adjust the rate or ask if anything was wrong. He took the key and slid it into a drawer that I noticed, in the moment before he closed it, was already full of other keys. We drove away without looking back and did not stop until there were other cars around us, and the road had returned to something that had witnesses on it. The kids were quiet in a way that told me they had understood more than we had said out loud. We did not report what we had found, not that night. We told ourselves we had nothing concrete, just instincts and fragments, a bad feeling and some objects behind a dumpster that might have ordinary explanations. We drove until we found a chain hotel that smelled aggressively of bleach and coffee, and we checked in, and the children relaxed and laughed at something on television and Sarah, and I stayed up late talking quietly about what our memories held. A few days later, once we were home, I tried to find the lodge's listing again. It was still up, photos unchanged, descriptions cheerful and vague. I scrolled through the reviews and noticed gaps. Weeks with no activity, then a short, oddly phrased positive comment that read less like a guest's experience and more like a placeholder designed to move the overall rating in a particular direction. I wrote a careful review, factual and specific, the lack of other guests, the doors locked from the outside, the objects behind the dumpster. I used measured language and chose each word to be accurate rather than alarming. Posting it felt heavier than it should have, like sending something into depth you cannot see the bottom of. Not long after, the listing was gone. Not archived, not marked as closed. Gone. No record on any booking site. On satellite view, the building still existed, but it had no digital identity anymore, No accommodation information, no way for a traveler to find it through normal channels. Sarah called me over when she noticed. We stared at the screen for a long time. Some things do not survive attention. That is true of a lot of things, but it is most true of things that should not have been operating in the first place. We never found out what that lodge was being used for. I have made my peace mostly with not knowing. The children have no memory of the trip that goes darker than being confused about why we left so quickly. That feels like the best possible outcome. But I still think about those keys in the drawer. All of them. The way the drawer was full. The ease with which he opened it and slid ours in. The practiced motion of a man who had done it many times. Every key in that drawer was a guest who had checked in. And I have never been able to finish that thought without a cold moving through me that takes a long time to leave. Trust the part of you that says something is wrong. Trust it before you understand why. Trust it especially when everything looks ordinary. Because the things you need to be afraid of in this world have learned, through practice, to look exactly like everything else. Story 8. The Pickup. My friend Logan and I were on a road trip to clear our heads. Nothing dramatic. Life had been compressing itself into a shape I did not recognize, and movement felt like the closest available approximation of relief. We drove without a fixed schedule, stopping when something looked interesting, pushing through when the road felt open. No itinerary, no urgency. Just the particular freedom of being somewhere between one place and another, which for a certain kind of exhaustion is the only geography that helps. The highway thinned out as the afternoon went on. I noticed the radio stations dying one by one, the signal fragmenting, the static taking larger and larger portions of whatever song had been playing. Logan mentioned it was kind of nice to be unreachable, and I agreed, and we drove in the comfortable silence of two people who had known each other long enough not to need to fill it. The car gave out without warning. A sudden loss of power, a loss that felt nothing like a mechanical failure because there was no drama to it, just the engine quietly withdrawing its cooperation, and then we were rolling on momentum toward the shoulder. Logan tried the ignition several times while I stood outside with the hood propped up, breathing in air that smelled of hot metal and dry grass, watching the empty highway in both directions. No signal on either phone. Logan laughed and said at least we would not be getting work emails. I laughed too. We decided to wait for someone to pass. The first time the pickup appeared, I did not think much about it. An older dark-colored truck with a rattling quality to its engine that lingered after it passed. The driver slowed slightly as he went by, his head turning toward us, but that is a natural response to seeing a car pulled over on the shoulder. Ordinary. A person noticing something out of place on the shoulder. He passed, and the sound of his engine faded, and Logan and I went back to waiting. The second pass was different. The same truck, coming from the opposite direction now, which meant he had either turned around somewhere ahead or had come from a side road I had not noticed. He slowed even more this time, his tires drifting toward the edge of the shoulder, close enough that I could hear the crunch of gravel under them. I could not see his face clearly through the windshield, just the silhouette of someone behind the wheel who was looking at us with the focused attention of someone who had decided to look. The truck picked up speed again and pulled away, and Logan watched it go with his hands in his pockets. He joked that the guy must be lost. His voice did not sell it. The third pass made us stop talking. He came from the same direction as the first time, moving even more slowly now, the truck almost walking speed as it rolled past us. This time the alignment was more deliberate, the truck drifting to the shoulder and holding there, the driver's window at the same height as our car, and though I still could not see his face, I could tell that his head was turned toward us for the entire duration of his passing. Not a glance. A sustained look that lasted until the road curved slightly and broke the sightline. When the truck disappeared again, the quiet it left behind felt different from the quiet before it. Logan was looking at me with an expression that said he had dropped the joke. We both checked our phones again and found nothing. Then the truck came back and did not pass. It pulled over ahead of us, about 30 yards up the shoulder, and the hazard lights came on in an uneven rhythm that felt less like a malfunction and more like a mannerism. The driver stepped out slowly, and I registered him in pieces as he walked toward us. Ball cap pulled low, boots that looked too clean for someone who had been driving a vehicle that rattled like that one, jeans, a jacket, an ordinary appearance that I was no longer reading as ordinary. He asked if we needed help. His voice was calm in a practiced way, flat in the register that voices sometimes go when they are being carefully managed rather than just naturally at rest. Logan thanked him and said someone was coming, which was not true. The man acknowledged this without appearing to believe it, and then he started offering things. Tools, a tow, a ride to wherever we were trying to get, said he was happy to take both of us. His eyes kept moving between us and our car in a pattern that felt like assessment rather than casual interest, and his offers did not carry the quality of someone extending genuine help. They carried the quality of someone trying to find the specific offer we would accept. When we declined again, something shifted behind his expression. Not a dramatic change, not a visible hardening, just a very small recalibration, the way a strategy adjusts when its first version does not work. He nodded and walked back to his truck. We sat in the car with the doors locked, windows cracked for air, and said very little. Logan tried to keep the conversation going, talking about food he wanted to get once we were moving again, and I appreciated the effort, even though we both knew what we were actually doing was waiting and watching, and trying not to show how completely exposed we felt. The sun had started to tip toward the horizon when the pickup appeared again. He came slowly from ahead, pulling over behind us this time, a few car lengths back, and he sat there with the engine running and the window down and his arm resting on the door, just sitting, not getting out, not leaving, just present in the deliberate way of someone who wants their presence to be felt. Logan watched him in the mirror and said we should stay put and not react. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edges of it. When the man finally stepped out, he did not smile this time. He walked toward us with a directness that the earlier approaches had not carried, and he was close enough when he stopped that I could smell oil and cigarette residue on his clothes, a smell I have not been able to fully separate from that afternoon since. He repeated his offer to help, and the friendliness that had been in his voice the first time was now a thin coating over something harder and less patient. We told him again that we were fine. He looked at me for a second that lasted longer than a second, the specific duration of a look that is communicating something without words, and then he turned and went back to his truck and drove away hard enough to kick a small cloud of dust and gravel into the air. After that, neither Logan nor I spoke much. We sat in the car and waited. The silence between us was not uncomfortable, it was just dense, the kind of silence that forms when two people are both paying very close attention to the same thing. A roadside service truck appeared from the opposite direction about 40 minutes later, its lights flashing in a way that felt almost unreal. The driver was businesslike and efficient, hooking up the car and asking quick practical questions while I kept scanning the road in both directions. As he worked, I watched for the pickup. It did not come back. We ended up at a small town diner while the car was being worked on, and Logan was talking to the mechanic when I found the article on the diner's Wi-Fi. It was buried near the bottom of a local news page. Short, sparse with detail. It described a string of roadside robberies along a nearby highway stretch over the previous several months. The pattern, described in 3 compact paragraphs, involved a dark pickup truck that would identify a stranded vehicle, make multiple passes, and then approach once the driver felt isolated enough. The article did not say whether anyone had been caught. It did say that victims who had accepted help or rides had fared significantly worse than those who had stayed with their vehicles. I read it twice. I read it a third time to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I handed the phone to Logan and watched his face while he read it. The color that left his face did not come back for a while. We paid and left without finishing the food. We barely spoke during the rest of the drive. Every pickup truck we passed in the next several hours produced a physical response in both of us, shoulders tightening, attention pulling sharply to the mirror. Later, in the days after I got home, I kept checking news from that region. A few more small reports surfaced over the following weeks. Then nothing. No arrest announced. No conclusion. Just the absence of resolution that is itself a kind of answer. Logan told me weeks later, sitting in a different diner in a different state, that at one point while we were waiting, he had genuinely considered getting into the man's truck, just to end the waiting. Just because the waiting had lasted so long and the anxiety of it had made the offer feel almost reasonable. He said it made him feel ashamed. I told him it did not. I told him that shame belonged to the person who designed the situation to produce exactly that feeling, who knew that isolation and helplessness and extended fear will eventually make almost any exit look acceptable. That is the mechanism. That is how it works. Not force, initially. Just time and patience and the slow erosion of the feeling that staying put is sustainable. The reason we did not get into that truck is not because we were smarter or braver than people who have gotten into trucks like that. It is because a service vehicle happened to come along before the waiting became unbearable. That is the whole distance between our story and a very different one. The 40 minutes. The arrival of the service truck. I carry a roadside kit now. Water, a paper map, flares, a basic tool set. Not because I believe preparation prevents all bad outcomes, because it does not. But because I never want to feel that powerless again, that dependent on a stranger's good intentions, that reduced by circumstances to something another person can simply wait out. If your car breaks down on an isolated road and someone begins making repeated passes, stay in your vehicle. Stay visible. Call for help through official channels if you have any signal at all. And understand that the patience of someone circling back multiple times is not the patience of a person who wants to help you. It is the patience of a person who is waiting for you to make a decision you cannot take back. Story 9. The Detour. Subscribe to Creepyverse right now if you have not already, because we are about to go into the last story of this video, and it is the one that has been sitting with me the longest. Leave a comment when you finish it. Tell me what you think happened on that road, because I genuinely want to know. Here is what I know. Some places do not want visitors, and some of them have made arrangements to ensure that visitors do not leave easily. Early that morning, the trip had felt simple. A drive across several states with my friends Mason and Riley, the kind of road trip without a fixed agenda that feels less like travel and more like pressing pause on your ordinary life. We rotated the driving, argued about music, made each other laugh with increasingly stupid observations about the landscape. The car smelled like gas station coffee and the citrus dashboard wipes Riley used obsessively. Everything was easy and pointless in the best possible way. By late afternoon, the highway had thinned and the GPS had rerouted us without warning, insisting on a narrow exit that cut through farmland instead of keeping us on the interstate we had been following. At first it felt harmless enough. Rolling hills, fences along empty fields. The kind of agricultural land that looks like it has been the same way for 100 years and will be the same way for 100 more. Cell service disappeared by increments. 1 bar, then no bars, then not even the ghost of a signal, just the map on the screen and our blinking dot moving along it. Mason tapped the phone and laughed about it. The laugh did not last. The road narrowed. The asphalt developed an uneven quality, cracked and patched in ways that suggested intermittent rather than consistent maintenance. The sky went grey and heavy, and the fields on either side transitioned gradually from worked land to something that looked more abandoned than agricultural. Mailboxes leaned at wrong angles. There were no lights, no visible houses, nothing that said people lived here currently rather than having lived here once. We eventually reached what passed for a town. A cluster of buildings at the junction of two roads, nothing more. A gas pump with peeling paint. A diner with one fluorescent light flickering in the window. A handful of trucks parked in the lot with the settled quality of vehicles that had not moved in some time. We pulled in, relieved to see evidence of population. Inside the diner, the air smelled of old grease and burned coffee, and the conversations going on when we pushed through the door did not exactly stop, but they changed quality. The handful of people inside went from whatever they had been doing to watching us, and they watched us in a way that was not curious. Curious has an energy to it, an openness. This was watchful, still, directional, like being observed by a group of people who had made a prior decision about what we represented. I asked the older man behind the counter how to get back to the highway, keeping my voice friendly and my request straightforward. He did not answer immediately. He looked past me toward the window, taking his time in a way that felt deliberately unhurried, and then he muttered something about taking the long way around without specifying what the long way was or why we could not take the direct route. A woman at one of the tables shook her head slightly and said, in a voice not entirely directed at us, that the roads were not safe after dark. She did not explain what made them unsafe or unsafe for whom. We went back outside. The sky had continued darkening, and the shadows had extended across the lot in a way that said we had less daylight remaining than I had estimated. Mason pointed out that one of the parked trucks had started its engine while we were inside. The sound was low and unhurried, an engine warming up rather than a vehicle preparing to leave. We got in our car and drove. As we left the lot and turned onto the road leading away from the cluster of buildings, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Then another, further back. No one passed us. No one honked or signaled or did anything that would indicate they were simply traveling in the same direction. They appeared and maintained their distance and matched our speed. Riley tried the GPS, and the screen was frozen, the map static, the dot suspended. Useless. The silence inside our car had gone from comfortable to loaded. Mason checked his mirror and said they were probably just locals heading home. His jaw was tight when he said it, and the observation did not match his expression. The farther we drove, the more deliberate everything felt. The trucks behind us did not vary their spacing. They moved with a coordination that felt practiced rather than coincidental. When we slowed, they slowed. When Mason gradually increased speed, they adjusted to match. 3 sets of headlights now, spaced with a regularity that had nothing accidental about it. There were no streetlights. Our headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, and the rest of the world was the kind of black that has no variation in it, no shades, no depth. Every farmhouse we passed sat far back from the road with every window dark, not the darkness of sleep, but the darkness of vacancy, of structures that served a different function than housing people who turned lights on at the end of the day. We came to a fork in the road and slowed, and that was the moment when one of the vehicles behind us flashed its high beams. Once, sharp, brief. A second later, another one did the same. The signal, if that was what it was, had no translation I could offer with any certainty. But Mason accelerated, and the vehicles behind us closed the gap immediately. A truck pulled alongside us briefly, just long enough for me to register an arm resting out the window, unhurried, demonstrating that it could be there without effort. Then it dropped back. No one tried to pass. No one tried to stop us directly. They seemed to be content with containment, with keeping us exactly where we were on a road that was going wherever the road went. Riley spotted the sign, half buried in overgrown weeds at the side of the road, a faded arrow pointing to what might have been the highway. Mason took the turn without slowing. The car jolted and shuddered as the road surface deteriorated immediately, rougher and more broken than what we had been on. The vehicles behind us hesitated at the turn, and in that hesitation, I felt a physical relaxation run through all three of us that none of us gave voice to, because giving voice to relief felt dangerous while we were still on that road. One of the vehicles turned off and did not follow. The other two did. The road climbed a small hill and dipped into a dense tree corridor where the branches closed in from both sides, and for a moment, the headlights behind us disappeared behind the curve of the hill. The brief darkness in the mirror was the most purely relieving thing I had experienced all day. Then the headlights reappeared, closer than before, and Mason pushed the engine harder. The road straightened, and ahead, faint but unmistakable, were the reflective markers of a major highway. The bright uniform infrastructure of a road that was part of a system that had been built for everyone rather than belonging to a particular geography or particular people. When our tires hit the smooth asphalt, the vehicles behind us slowed, then stopped. Their headlights, which had maintained such relentless presence for the last several miles, went dark one by one in a sequence that felt too orderly to be coincidence. Mason did not slow down for another 10 miles. We stopped eventually at a rest area, a real one, with lights and other travelers and vending machines that hummed with ordinary electricity. None of us got out of the car right away. We sat with the engine off and the windows cracked and just breathed. When we finally started talking, it was in the fragmented way of people reassembling an experience into language. We had not been threatened directly. No one had stopped us, confronted us, or made an explicit demand. But we had been followed, deliberately, coordinately, by people who had started moving the moment we left a place where we had been openly and specifically watched. By people who had remained behind us through every turn on a road with no lights, in vehicles that communicated with each other by signal, until we found our way back to a highway where they apparently did not follow. Whatever they were doing it with the confidence of people who had done it before. They controlled the pace. They controlled the silence. They used the road itself as the instrument, funneling us into isolation rather than chasing us out of it. Riley said what we had all been thinking, which was that we were lucky the sign was where it was. That night in the motel, I searched local forums and old news boards for anything that matched what we had experienced. The results were scattered and vague. Mentions in posts years old about travelers who had broken down on back roads in that region and not been heard from, about assaults that produced no identified suspects, about people found disoriented on logging roads with no clear account of what had happened to them. The kind of content that might be nothing, might be rumor, might be the specific texture of things that actually happened to real people and never made it to any record larger than a local forum post and a comment section where other locals told each other to stay on the main roads after dark. We altered the rest of the route manually, bypassing every shortcut and GPS suggestion, staying on major highways, stopping only where there were crowds around us and multiple points of exit. The trip ended early, not because of distance, but because none of us wanted to keep pretending we were still on vacation. We were not. We were people who had been somewhere we should not have been and gotten back out, and the getting back out had cost something that we did not have a name for yet. What stays with me is not the fear in the moment, though the fear was significant. What stays with me is the coordination, the way the trucks spaced themselves, the way the high beam signal communicated something to a vehicle that had not reached the fork yet, the way their headlights went out in sequence once we reached the highway, like a system that had been activated and was now being deactivated because the opportunity had passed. This was not random. This was not opportunistic in the sense that the word is usually used, meaning unplanned and improvised. This was practiced, refined, the kind of routine that continues until someone stops it, and nothing about the aftermath suggested that anyone had stopped it. I still take road trips, but I treat them differently now. Printed maps, offline navigation downloaded before the phone loses signal, a hard rule about never following a GPS reroute once I lose cell service without first consulting the paper backup, and an absolute refusal to enter any road that begins to feel wrong, regardless of how much time it costs to turn around. Some roads are not infrastructure. Some roads are instruments. The difference is not always visible until you are already on them. Outro. 9 stories, 9 roads, 9 ordinary trips that became the kind of experience that divides a life into before and after. What strikes me, sitting with all of them, is not the dramatic violence of some of these accounts, though that is real and it is terrible. What strikes me is the quality of the ordinary that preceded each of them. A couple heading south to celebrate Thanksgiving. 5 friends packing a Suburban for spring break. A retired postal worker and his wife of 41 years finally taking the road trip they had been postponing for a decade. A paralegal and 4 friends heading to New Orleans for a bachelor party weekend. People with plans. People with people waiting for them somewhere else. People who would have been completely unrecognizable as the subjects of horror stories if you had seen them pulling out of their driveways that morning. The darkness in these accounts does not come announced. It does not arrive with music and atmosphere, and the lighting cues of a film that has decided to tell you something bad is about to happen. It arrives as a smile, as a pair of headlights staying at the same distance for too long, as a gas station attendant who watches you pull away and does not stop watching until the road takes you from his sight, as a key sliding into a drawer full of other keys, as a light in the trees pointed at you that turns off when it realizes you have seen it. Pay attention to the small things, the gut feeling before the rational mind has caught up, the detail that does not fit, the silence that has a quality rather than just an absence of sound. Every person in these 9 stories described the moment they knew, the precise second when the ordinary tipped into something that was not ordinary. And in almost every case, they knew before they had evidence, before anything had happened that they could point to and name. Trust that knowing. It exists for a reason. It is older than language and smarter than certainty, and it is trying, in every situation, to keep you alive. Pull over somewhere well lit. Call 911 rather than stopping for someone who has flagged you down in the dark. Verify a traffic stop before you step out of your vehicle. Check for other guests before you unpack. Pay attention to the drawer of keys. Notice how a stranger walks, what his hands are doing, whether his smile arrives in his eyes. Notice what is wrong before wrong is all there is. These 9 people all have something in common. They live to tell their stories. In some cases, barely. In all cases, because of some combination of instinct and quick decisions, and in more than one account, the intervention of complete strangers whose names they still remember years later. Hank, who wrapped his jacket around a man kneeling in the freezing dark. Glenn Barker, who pulled over without asking questions for an elderly couple covered in dirt and scratches at the side of a mountain road. The trooper in the rest stop lot, who listened carefully as 5 shaking young men tried to explain what had just happened on Interstate 10. The world that makes these stories possible is the same world that makes those men possible. Both things are true. Both things live in the same dark, and it is worth remembering that one of them is considerably more common than the other. Drive carefully, pay attention, stay on the lit roads where other people pass. And if something tells you to keep going, to not pull over, to find another exit, to leave before dark, to not get out of the car, to not step out alone onto the shoulder of an empty road at night, then listen to it. Listen to it every time. This is Creepyverse. These are the stories that need to be told. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one is ready. Like this video if it kept you watching. Leave a comment and tell me which story shook you the most. Stay safe out there. The road is long and most of it is fine. But not all of it. Not all of it. Where forgotten darkness lives.